Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a weekly radio show that appears every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your public radio station. And my name is Paul Gibson, and I'm the host of Retake Our Democracy. I got to get this timer going there. Okay, got the timer going. Today I'm going to be speaking with Senator Jeff Steinborn, sponsor for SB 53, the Storage of a Certain Radioactive Waste Act. And the certain radioactive waste is the radioactive waste that the federal government wants New Mexico to store indefinitely, triggering a mountain of grassroots opposition. We'll find out more about the waste, the Fed's plan, and why Senator Steinborn introduced this legislation. We'll get to the senator in just a moment, but first a few short announcements. Last week, I spoke with my wife and Retake co-founder, Roxanne Barber, as we reviewed where we stand after 2 weeks in the legislative session. We also highlighted a couple of trends or themes that we have found resonating in every session and pronouncedly in this one. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town and miss any of the show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on Retake on the radio button on the right lower side of the homepage, and you'll find recordings of all our previous shows listed in chronological order. Retake takes pride in delivering compelling interviews on important topics. So when on the Retake on the Radio page, take some time to review old interviews too. The session is in high gear, so we have resurrected our weekly Zoom huddles, with the next being this coming Wednesday, February 15th at 6 p.m. Each week, we discuss developments in the legislative process and offer updates on any of the bills we support, all 27 of them. Together, we also develop messaging and advocacy strategy for passing those bills. Huddles are highly interactive and offer a great way to connect with other activists. So join us, learn more about how the legislature works and how you can lobby effectively. You must register to attend. To get more information and a link to register, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on the actions and events in the homepage banner. You'll find the link near the top of the page. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn much from them, from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. Okay, let's meet Senator Steinborn. Welcome, Jeff. I think it's been about a year since you've been on the show. So welcome back.
Hey, good to see you, Paul.
Okay, so I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about you tell us how and why you got into the legislature in the first place, and give us an idea of your general legislative priorities.
Sure, you bet. And I have to warn your viewers ahead of time that I have a short amount of time because I have a committee meeting starting in a few, but I always want to talk to you and about what's going on. And if we run short, we can talk more later. But I'm from Las Cruces and been in the legislature. This is my 15th year. I do conservation work outside of the legislature for a living. And, have worked in public policy for quite a while for 2 members of Congress and done advocacy on just a wide range of issues, and just very passionate about trying to, leave New Mexico better than we found it and solve problems that we face. So that's it. And one of the problems we face right now is we got this train moving down the station of high-level nuclear waste with a bullseye on New Mexico, and have a bill to try to keep that from happening.
So you've introduced SB 53, and it's a redo of a bill you introduced last session. But before we get into SB 53 and what it would do, tell us a bit about what the Fed's plans are to store radioactive waste in New Mexico, and what kind of waste and where would it be stored?
So it's basically, there's an application right now for a license, a 40-year license for what's called a consolidated interim storage facility with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is a federal agency that manages high-level nuclear waste, which is primarily spent nuclear fuel from nuclear power plants. There's a proposal. This waste is sitting all over the country next to nuclear power plants. And there's a proposal for a private company called Holtec to build a facility here in New Mexico ship it across the country on rail, and store the entire nation's supply of high-level nuclear waste in New Mexico in Lee County. And it would be for a 40-year license, and then presumably would go to what the federal government, by law, is required to have a permanent solution in a deep geological repository, which is what Yucca Mountain was supposed to be. The problem is there is no Yucca Mountain and there is no permanent repository. So Yucca Mountain, that got stopped by the federal government. That was going to be the deep geological repository. So, as a convenient solution to someone else's problem, they want to send it all here, and kind of like throwing us off a cliff without a parachute. And that license is expected maybe given as soon as March to Holtec.
I see. So from a New Mexico's environmental perspective, what is wrong with this plan?
Well, what's wrong with it is obviously radioactive waste is dangerous. Radiation can kill people. And it's moving that exposure, that risk profile to our state in various different forms. First form will be in the transport of it. We're talking about 10,000 casks over 20 years, shipped more than twice the national stockpile of high-level nuclear waste this facility would be permitted for. Everything that exists now, more than times two. But 10,000 casks. So they would be shipped in on rail with armed guard. And according to the federal government's document, their environmental impact statement, they estimate that there would be up to 13 rail accidents. And what they also maintain, of course, vigorously, the company, is that the casks are safe, that the chance of radiation leak or exposure, it's really not leak because they're solid pellets, but nonetheless, exposure to those pellets, radiation, is very low. And of course, that's cold comfort when you're the one absorbing that risk. And we see what happened the other day in Pennsylvania. So if it's one thing we've learned in nuclear waste storage, we've seen it in WIP, is it's not the things you plan for that happen often. It's these unintended stuff happens, and so up to 13 rail accidents will occur shipping this stuff. That's first part of risk. And then over time, as these thousands of casks sit in our desert, who's to say if there's malfunctions? Who's to say if this company goes out of business? There's just so many potential risks for us that then make it our problem, right, to deal with when they're all sitting here in the state. So it's just, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's an alternative solutions, better solutions for the federal government and certainly for New Mexico.
So one of the things I've wondered is if it's risky and 13 accidents, that makes my hair stand on edge. And that's what the feds are actually acknowledging. But one of the things that I have also been told is that if it's so safe and easy to store, why don't they just keep it where it is? Mm-hmm. It's been there for years, right?
Right. Well, there's two reasons. Number one, they want to make more of it. So it's taking space there at a nuclear power plant when they want to create more nuclear waste. And the second reason, though, you have a lot of places that are shut down, is those communities. I mean, when you have a pile of nuclear waste sitting there, it kind of limits your economic development and attractiveness. And so they want to get rid of it. But they somehow think that it's okay to force it on a state en masse. And it's not okay. And that's what this bill is about, is saying, hey, we don't consent. And you need to go about a different process, federal government, that actually is one of a consent-based process where you actually work with a state. You don't shove it down their throat. You provide, and so I could give my ideas for what the federal government right now is talking about a new consent-based path. They've actually appropriated millions of dollars. They've solicited interest from around the country, and now they're selecting a handful of communities, and only ones where there's demonstrated support to even advance this conversation. So it's preposterous that while they're having that conversation on one hand in the Department of Energy, they have the sister agency about to license a facility. And that's really the important thing, because that's law. Law allows that right now. The consent-based one is well-intentioned, but the law needs to be changed to require that. And that's what we ought to be pushing for.
So I've seen an argument offered that New Mexico has benefited from nuclear power, so it is our duty to put our shoulder to the wheel and pitch in. What is wrong with that argument?
Well, we do use a little bit of nuclear power from the Palo Verde nuclear plant in Arizona, and that's true. But we are also less than 0.5% of the country's population. So let's put our responsibility in check. By being less than 0.5% of the population, much of which does not get any nuclear energy, are we then obligated? No, we're not. And so that's a bunk argument. We do have to all acknowledge that this waste is out there, some of what, very small amount we created, and we do need a safe storage. And I don't think any of us are saying we're not, of course, opposed to that. What we're opposed to is this little half-baked solution of interim storage that doesn't even have permanent storage in place, because it's just common sense. You would then be moving those 13 accents we talked about. You're then moving the waste twice by definition, right? Because you're moving it to temporary storage and then you're moving it to a permanent storage. So why would you invite that level of risk?
Twice.
Twice. It's just so it's just not logical. And
so we'll get to your SB 53 in just a minute, Jeff, but we need to take a short break to remind our listeners that KSFR is more important than ever right now, with so much misinformation in the social media and mainstream media. At KSFR, you get straight news every hour. You get national and local news and state news. Democracy Now!, which gives you Amy Goodman's perspective on what's going on in the world, one of the best news programs ever. And you get great music and cultural discussions and radio shows like this, where there's analysis of political and cultural and legislative and issues that impact New Mexico. So if you're listening to this program, and when the program's over, go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button and look at it as, give them 10, 20, 50 bucks, whatever you can afford, and look at it as a ticket for admission to some really great programming. So let's get back to Senator Jeff Steinborn, and talk about some of his about his SB 53. What would that legislation do, Senator?
So it would prohibit the storage and disposal of high-level nuclear waste in the state of New Mexico. That's one thing it does. And it would also prohibit the state from issuing permits or licenses or other, governmental items needed to for the construction or operation of a disposal facility. So it's recognized that Holtec would need about a half a dozen different state permits to build it. It would make it illegal for the state to issue those permits. And so now there's two conditions on that. The two conditions are, we cannot do those things and they cannot store it unless the state concurs or supports a proposal. And number two, until there is a federal permanent repository in operation. That's a deep geological repository. And obviously that's not going to happen for quite a while. And we obviously do not support it. And so that's what the bill does.
Okay, so both you and Representative Matthew McQueen each introduced bills last session to stop Holtec. How did that fare, and what caused the bill to not get to the governor?
The bill just never got brought up for a vote on the House floor. And it's sometimes you'll introduce a bill in both chambers. Of course, a bill has to go through both chambers in order to then go up to the governor for law to become law. So sometimes you'll introduce a bill in both chambers just because it could get snagged up going one direction or the other. And that's what we did last session. And so the House bill version of the bill was moving quicker. So and then it sat on the House floor inexplicably for 10 days. And that was purely the decision of the Speaker of the House, who has sole discretion over what bills get brought up for a vote.
Right.
No, the bill actually never got defeated. It just did not get brought up for a vote. And the problem with the House is things very much locked down towards the end of the session. So had we tried to pass the Senate bill over to the House, it's likely it would not have gotten a vote going that direction. So now the bill is moving obviously much quicker. Senate Bill 53 has now passed both Senate committees, now with bipartisan support. 2 Republicans out of the 3 that were sitting in the committee and Senate Judiciary voted for the bill. One of them, Senator Purtle, represents Roswell, and And the final rail spur on this rail transport would go through Roswell, Clovis, Portales onto the site. So that's really, you want to really wrap your head around something upsetting as a New Mexican, is that all 10,000 shipments would go through that final corridor. How unfair is that to those towns? And so anyway, that the bill's now headed to the full Senate for a vote here, hopefully very soon, next few days.
I was kind of hoping it was going to happen today while I was waiting to see if we were going to be able to do the radio show.
Yeah.
I've read that the governor supports this bill. What is the general reaction within the Democratic Senate caucus and with Republicans?
Support is really strong, and I think it's growing within the Republican caucus. I mean, it's 0 hour. This is no longer theoretical. I had previous bills a few years to just get the state to study the impacts of this, to get them to do due diligence, which they hadn't done when Holtec first showed up on our doorstep. And now it's a different story. This thing's about to be licensed, and we have an opportunity to stand in the way of that and assert our state's interest as borne out by federal Supreme Court precedent that California passed a law, was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. So our state can take action, and now it's 0 hour. People get to make a decision. Is this the future I want for my community, to have these things rolling through and to have us be a legacy for future generations? Or do we want to say, no, we want a different federal process? And that's a different vote. And it's a vote of conscience, I think, for all my colleagues.
So a few minutes ago, you said you had possibly a better solution than this. What might your better solution be?
Well, the best solution would be for the federal government to really accelerate, the search for a permanent deep geological repository. Since it's not going to be Yucca Mountain, they need to get on with that, because nothing changes the fact that that solution is needed. So they need to put on the resources to do that. They have a very large fund of billions and billions of dollars collected for this purpose from power plants. The federal government's actually in violation of law. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act, I think it's that law, requires them to have had a solution by the mid-'80s. So because they haven't, they're having to pay out every year to the utilities to store it. They need to get on with finding a permanent repository. So what I would say is get on with that, continue to store this material on site. And if there's some places that are very sensitive where it needs to move, consolidate it with a nearby location where they already have spent fuel, they have some extra capacity. Incentivize those communities and those companies to do that. That's a piece that's important, because obviously no one's just jumping for joy to have to manage this material. But that would be what I would suggest is store it on site, consolidate where needed, waste in sensitive areas, and then wait until there's a permanent solution. Otherwise,
go ahead.
Well, that would be solution one. Solution two would be, to the extent that the federal government really wants to do interim storage, then I think the federal government should come up with a consent-based process where really they lead in a transparent, good faith dialogue with states that actually want it, and offer huge financial incentives. They probably even need to federalize the ownership so that there isn't a question of safety. There isn't a question of training, not this Mickey Mouse stuff we've been dealt with Holtec, where they hire lobbyists. So they it's just like trying to force it down our throat. They need to just change the whole structure of how they're approaching interim storage. And so I would prefer the first solution, but that's going to obviously take some time.
Why haven't they? I mean, who came up with the idea of an interim storage? Is it just because the feds have failed to find a permanent storage? And have they suggested that maybe New Mexico could be the final storage?
No, we haven't been earmarked for that, pegged for that. Yucca Mountain is kind of the only site that I'm aware of federally that has been identified as being suitable. I don't think there is a plan B that's been identified, but I could be wrong on that. Nothing that any money or time is being spent on. So yeah, interim storage developed as just okay, well,
plan B.
Been scuttled. What are we going to do with this stuff? And really, let's be clear. You have a nuclear power industry, the Nuclear Energy Institute, that is spending a lot of money and lobbying and helping to fund programs in our federal government for research, there's an actual industry out there that is pushing for this solution because they support nuclear energy. And that industry exists at high levels. I was just at a working group meeting with all kinds of states and the federal government, and those lobbyists were all around. And it's just, advancing their solutions. So, and I want to just say that, sometimes they'll try to paint this issue in this bill even as you're anti-nuclear energy or you're anti. Of course, this has nothing to do with whether or not you support nuclear energy. It has to do with, do you support having this way shoved down New Mexico's throat in the way it has, with the risks that are coming at us when there are alternatives to do it a better way and a fairer way. And so it's a false choice when you're told we either have to accept this or we have no other solution. No. This is just a convenient industry solution where an industry called Holtec would stand to make a lot of money, and a few boosters in southeastern New Mexico. This is their solution. This is not a national solution.
Okay. So I'm sure you have other bills that you've introduced this session. Can you tell us about a couple of them?
I can, and then unfortunately I probably got a scoop, but Paul, you and I have been working for years. You've seen me try to get full transparency of all lobbying in the state of New Mexico, and Senate Bill 217 and 218 to try to get all lobbyists and employers of lobbyists to have to disclose which bills they're working on, because a lot of these bills are written by companies and interest groups, and we all don't really know where they come from. That's just wrong and gaming of the system to hide that, obscure that. And then also a bill to require them to disclose how much money they're spending to try to hire their lobbyists and influence policy, so that we can see how much money is involved. This is just continues to be super important. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of bills like we do every year that you don't really know who's behind this bill, who would benefit from it. If we knew those two pieces of information, man, how powerful would that be before we voted on it? And for you as an advocate and a citizen to say, wow, that's fascinating. Why has the pharmaceutical industry spent $1 million against that bill? It could tell you a lot about that bill.
Right.
So,
like to vote for it.
so I would really urge, please, that bill, like always, it heads to the Rules Committee. So much of what we do, information is the root of empowerment to get better government and better elected officials, but we need transparency. So I urge you all to get behind Senate Bill 217 and 18, which I also have Republican co-sponsors with as well for the first time, which is kind of cool.
Okay. And I assume that you're a big supporter of modernizing the legislature and wouldn't turn down a paycheck for yourself and a paycheck for a staffer.
It's really about being able to pay my bills and being able to dedicate more time to, because I'm of working age, I have to have a job. And, it's just, do we want a legislature that's part-time, that can't afford to work, put more hours into, the hours needed, or maybe whatever, and then have staff to work on it. So we really have created a weakened legislative branch. And that vacuum is being filled by interest groups, companies, and the executive branch. And I don't think we're getting the best possible outcomes with that. So, yeah,
well, I think one of the things that we could do with that is it would lessen the influence of lobbyists, because the lobbyists would be like bending your ear in the first 30 days. Then you'd get 5 days off, and you'd hand the bill and the lobbyist positions to your staffer, who could go and research the validity of their assertions. And the next thing you know, you're taking a different position.
Indeed. So let me tell you about one other, and I agree with you. Let me tell you about one other bill that I'm really stoked about.
Okay.
To ban single-use plastic bags in the state of New Mexico. Really excited about this because, we just have to confront plastic pollution. And, we're seeing plastics. We're learning that plastics never really biodegrade all the way. Right. And they become what they're now calling microplastics. They're showing up in animals, the most pristine waters on the planet. And we're just producing so much of it. So there are states now starting to ban them as state law. And if we do this in New Mexico, it would save about probably more than 500 million plastic bags a year from going into our environment. And also when you drive down the highway and you see all these plastic bags and fences, and it's also one of the most littered items that's really costs a lot of money for local governments to have to clean up and really polluting our beautiful land of enchantment. So very excited about that bill as well.
And what's the number on that one?
Man, I knew you were going to ask me that question. And let me see, it is Senate Bill 243.
Okay, well, we'll put it on our list. Thank you very much, Senator, for joining me. I know you're crazy busy and you got to
Thanks,
get off
John.
to Senate Finance right now. So I'm going to close the show.
Good, thank
but
you.
I'm going to let you take off.
Great to be with you.
So Senator Steinborn had to run to Senate Finance Committee. I've got a couple of minutes, so I just want to make one comment. It's critical to remain active in these times of change and challenge. Retake tries to make it easier for you to do this and to stay engaged, to get in the game. Go to retakeourdemocracy.org and sign up for our blog. You'll get 1 to 2 posts a week with timely analysis of politics, policy issues, and legislation with a New Mexico focus. If you want to stay on top of what is going on in the Roundhouse and when and how you can effectively weigh in, you can also sign up for our alerts on the homepage. We send out alerts when any bill we support is being heard in a committee the next day or soon thereafter. The alerts include time and location of the hearing and how you can offer public comment in writing or verbally, in person or at the hearing or from your couch. The alert also includes a link to a bill summary, speaking points for the bill, and also contact info for the legislators who will be hearing that bill. So it's a very handy tool for being able to stay on top of what's going on at the Roundhouse. Okay, so, and while you're at our website, I'd strongly encourage you to take a tour. Just use the search engine and put a keyword in about an issue that you care a great deal about, and you'll undoubtedly get 3 or 4 articles on that topic. So it's a good way to find out who we are and whether you want to follow us more closely. Until next week, I think I'm going to have Amber Wallen from New Mexico Voices for Children on next week. So that should be an interesting show. We'll be talking tax policy and children and all kinds of good things. So we'll be back next week. So until then, stay healthy, stay well, and stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Bye-bye.